three people with whom I sat together a couple of days with Sima, but a couple of years in Swakopmund and in the Waterberg region, where we commemorated the Waterberg battle in August 2018. So on the far right, Sima Luipert, a Nama activist and yeah, very impressive person whom you can listen to in a longer sequence. She spoke on several occasions. And she has also a very long personal stories to tell. So if you look at our website and put Sima Luipert, you will find several interesting pieces of her. Next to her is Vepuka Kauari from the US. And she will also talk a little bit from her perspective as part of the exile community, Herero exile community in the US, as well as Ngondi Kamatuka to my right. And then we have also Rolando Vazquez from the University of Utrecht joining us on the stream. My name is Wolfgang Kaleck, and I'm the General Secretary of the European Center of the Constitution and Human Rights here in Berlin. And I had the pleasure to know Marcelo Brodsky for quite a while, because my organization works as well on the dictatorship crimes in Argentina as on the colonial genocide. And the interesting thing is, if you compare the two situations, Marcelo stands for a type of artist and activist in Argentina, part of the human rights movement, who works since a very long time with political, social actors, with artists, with lawyers, to achieve something like truth, memory, and justice. And in a way, they were quite successful, if you want to anyhow talk about success in the light of these mass crimes against humanity. But in a way, they achieved, with the help, with the solidarity from outside, they achieved quite a lot in Argentina, because there are trials in Argentina. There is a certain documentation of what happened there. And the interesting thing is, from a German perspective, where people play out certain approaches, or you are active in a demonstration, or you are an artist, or you are a lawyer. In Argentina, all these approaches complement each other. And so I think it's quite interesting to see this Argentinian example and try to, in a way, apply to Namibia. Because when it comes to Namibia, we have to say, Robert asked this question about education and told about his experience. What have we learned about the genocide, the genocide against the Herero and Nama in Germany? And it's actually close to nothing. I mean, it might be scandalous in the US, but here it's absolutely scandalous. And I want to clarify one thing, and that is that the Germans were not so eager to come to terms with the Holocaust as it seems now. It took decades and decades that the elites of the German society and the columns of the Nazi powers were still in power in the after 45 German Bundesrepublik Deutschland, the Republic of Western Germany. So it needed the Cultural Revolution of '68 plus minus. Marcelo is presenting his photos on the '68 rebellion upstairs. It needed this kind of break, this cultural break, and moreover, it needed these people to be dead. That in Germany people began to come into terms, and it's still disputed. So that's something we have to say. But when it comes to the genocide against the Herero Nama, it's difficult. It's really difficult to find words where to start and where to end, because it's everything we're talking about is scandalous. We're having nearly no real attempt to somehow investigate what happens from the state side. There are truth commissions all over the world on so many egregious situations, crimes against humanity and genocide. There are concepts of transitional justice. Germany is, sorry, could you be a bit, I'm sorry, it's really a bit disturbing. So we have Truth Commission, we have Transitional Justice Toolbox all over the world. Germany is sponsoring a lot of it. Germany is very active in the fields of human rights, but Germany is not at all active when it comes to the colonial crimes against the Ovaherero and Nama, but also other colonial situations in Cameroon and Tanzania, which are completely forgotten. They are completely forgotten because they don't have such communities as we assemble here today, the Nama community and the Ovaherero community. It was only due to them, it was only due to their efforts that this genocide is now on the agenda of Germany, because neither the Namibian state nor the German state had any interest to deal with the genocide. And it was only due to the efforts of these two communities, who started with lawsuits in the early 2000s and later with another lawsuits a couple of years ago in the US. And that triggered a certain interest that mobilized Ovaherero communities in the US, Nama and Ovaherero in Namibia, but also some, but not very many civil society actors here. When I look around, I see more non-Germans than Germans, which is an expression for where we are. And I don't want to go into details, but people would, if you ask people, even intellectual people here about Namibia and Germany, they would say, oh, but there was this reconciliation agreement recently. And I know the Germans are accepting the genocide. I mean, listen to Sima, and we completely agree on that point. Even the negotiations have to be criticized very, very strong, because they left out big parts of the affected communities. They didn't participate in the right way. And the results of the agreement is also somehow scandalous, because they are not talking of reparation. They are talking of kind of extended development aid, which is not at all the appropriate tool. So with that introduction, I would like to give the word to Sima. And
yes, yes, thank you very much, Wolfgang. I've had so many engagements in the last few days, and this afternoon I actually wrote a note to Ngondi, and also a note to my brother sitting there at the back counter, asking, what am I going to talk about? And it's so, you know, it's so, the subject is so broad, and there are so many themes that you can touch on. I don't know how much the audience actually knows about the genocide and what are the developments that are now in Namibia, but I will leave that to Ngondi. And I want to focus a little bit on these images that we are seeing on the wall here, and what they mean to me, and specifically what they mean to me as a woman. You know, it took me a very long time to actually speak about my personal experience. And I used my husband as a springboard to sort of recite to myself who I am actually. And it felt as if I do reveal this part of me to the public, then it would bring shame to my family. But once I spoke about it to my husband, it came so natural. It came so natural because that is who I am. And I cannot deny that, who I am. And so I am Sima Luipert. I am the granddaughter of a woman, Hannah Friedrich. She later married Hannah Isaac. I am the granddaughter of a woman who was raped by a German settler. My great-grandmother, her name was Katrina Friedrich. She is the daughter of Cornelius Friedrich. Cornelius Friedrich was a king, a Gaup of the Nama people, and Lothar von Trotta put a price of 3,000 Deutschmark on his head. Cornelius Friedrich was rounded up together with my great-grandmother and taken to Shark Island, of which you see some of the images here of Shark Island. Katrina Friedrich. Here, Katrina Friedrich had to endure rape. She had to scrape skulls. She scraped the skull of her own father. That skull is still here today in Germany, somewhere in either somebody's basement, either in an institution's basement, either at a university or a museum, we don't know. But all we know is that Germany owes my family an explanation. The rest of his body is buried somewhere, we don't know where. After his head was cut off and his skull scraped and brought here to Germany, the rest of his body was left somewhere on that island. And we still don't know where it is. When my great-grandmother was released from Shark Island, or actually she was not released when Shark Island was closed in 1908, she was taken to a concentration camp near Karibib, known as the Okawayo concentration camp. At this camp, this was a secondary camp where the prisoners were kept and from where they were rented out as slaves. She was rented out to a German settler family who now started to occupy the land that was confiscated first in 1905 and then again in 1907 through Ordinance 151 by imperial decree. This is how they lost their land, and this is how they became slaves on their own land. And it is by this German settler that my great-grandmother, Katrina Friedrich, was raped, and how my grandmother, Hannah Friedrich, was born. I remember my great-grandmother. I was a very small girl, a little child at the time, in Vazquez. It is today known as Malta here. Malta was the wife of a Schutztrooper, von Bergsdorf was his name, and his wife's name was Malta. And the village that I come from was named after Malta. And until today, that name remains. And the village the original name of this village is Vazquez. But in our history and in current narrative, it is known by the name of the woman whose husband murdered my people. Yeah, that is my history. I knew my great-grandmother as a very frail old woman. She was a very secluded woman. We were not allowed to come into her room. The only time that we would go into her room was to either take the soup for her or whatever my grandmother cooked for her, but strictly speaking, only adults were allowed into the room of my great-grandmother. We later buried her in her hometown in Betani in southern Namibia. Now, this story of my great-grandmother might seem just like one story of a woman who was raped, but I think there is something much more deeper. The sexual violence that was committed against the women during the colonial period, and particularly during the genocide, was institutionalized. It was systematic rape. It was not acts of individual male sexual lust, but these were acts of ensuring that you show these people that they are actually not human beings. You need to prove to these people that by raping a woman in front of her husband and in front of her child, there is absolutely nothing that this man can do. So he needs to feel and he needs to see his powerlessness. He needs to see his powerlessness, and psychologically, he needs to know that he is lesser than his master. This is what it was aimed at. It was psychological warfare. It was rape was used as a weapon of mass destruction. You did not need to only use the gun. You did not only need to use the hanging. You did not only need to use the logging. Just by raping, you show these people that they are less, and that they are lesser human beings, that they are not worthy of being human beings. And when I was looking at the parliamentary debate, you know, it is part of dehumanizing a community of people, so that they realize that as a community of people, they are not worthy of being a people. That's what it was aimed at. And when I was watching the parliamentary debate about the joint declaration that has just recently been initialed between the Namibian and the German two special envoys. When I was watching that parliamentary debate, I saw how women once again are used to become objects that are placed there to further the interest of the colonial master. Now, if you look at the joint declaration, that joint declaration is written in the interest of the colonial master. It is not written even in the interest of the new colonial servant, which is the Namibian government. The Namibian government is a new colonial servant of Germany and continues to be, and Germany continues to be the colonial master. This is just my opinion based on what I see in the joint declaration and based on the nature of the discussion that took place in the Namibian parliament. What happened during the parliamentary debate, and I haven't even looked at what I've prepared. What I've prepared to discuss, but what happened in the parliamentary debate is that the rest of the SWAPO parliamentarians went mute. They went mute. The entire SWAPO went mute. What did SWAPO do? They took Nama and Ovaherero women, dressed them up in the most beautiful Ovaherero attire, dressed them up in the most beautiful Nama attire. That is an objectification of women. They again became objects of the ruling party inside the Namibian parliament. And so all the SWAPO men and all the SWAPO women who are not Nama speaking and who are not Ovaherero speaking went mute. And so these women became the shield. These women became the shield between the colonial master and the new colonial servant, and again became the objects of the goal of the colonial master. And so they began to justify the joint declaration. They now needed to convince every Namibian, especially Nama and Ovaherero people, that Germany and the Namibian government are doing what is in the best interest of the Nama and the Ovaherero people. And so you see again, and then what also interestingly happened is that from the opposition bench, it was the Nama and Ovaherero men in the opposition parties that were now attacking their own women. There was one evening that I was watching the parliamentary debate, because during the day there's just simply no time to do it. So you rewind it in the evening and start to listen to it. When I broke down into tears, because I could see once again how Germany succeeded being aided very actively by the Namibian government to dehumanize Nama and Ovaherero people through their women. And so the game keeps playing itself over and over. And when I've read shortly after the joint declaration was announced, there was so much joy in Germany. Every newspaper article that we were reading was about how Germany made this breakthrough, how Germany finally is recognizing that something went wrong. But when you actively, not only with your mind, but also with your heart, observed what was happening inside the Namibian chambers, inside that parliament, you would see that once again, Germany is the victor. And so we keep fighting. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vepuka. I'm not from New York. I was born in Okakarara near Waterberg. I'm actually from Namibia, but working in New York. So I am not a scholar with genocide. I am self-taught. I'm a nurse by training. So some of the things that are dear to me is when I read about the genocide or when I look at these images, is you see that genocidal gaze that you see in these eyes. And you see how when you look at women, particularly the Herero and Nama women, who were not used to doing any work, none whatsoever, except caring for their children, taking care of their spouses, and some little work, maybe beautifying their homes, when they're now subjected to doing manual labor, contractual manual labor, building railroads. It is just heartbreaking. So I will go on to say, maybe if I could just touch a little bit on the notes that I have, so I could remember what I actually have put together. We started this work many years ago. Can everyone still hear me? So, but let's just all agree that what Germany committed was genocide. Whether we like to call it or use some euphemisms such as colonial atrocities, so it was a bad thing, it was genocide. We have to call it what it is. I think John Nakuda spoke in Namibia one time and he said, a spade is a spade. You can't call it anything else. So for that, this was genocide for all terms and purposes. The campaign was very clear. It was to wipe up the Ovaherero and the Nama people. Children, women were not spared. The German army targeted the Ovaherero and Nama people, and the aim was just to destroy the social architecture. Sexualized violence. So where that comes in, my grandmother looked really weird. She was an African woman for wearing the dress as an African or Ovaherero woman. But she had this fine hair that she would roll up in the front of her head to kind of hide the kind of hair that she had. She was as white as anything can be. And when I asked my father years on, they decided to tell the story because this was never discussed. And my grandmother, my great grandmother was newlywed. They were going to Tsumeb. The husband was going to work in the mines. And she is a newlywed, they walked on foot. And midway through there was a German soldier who took my great grandmother, told my great grandfather to go get lost. And she was now owned by this German. She bore 2 children, one of whom was my grandmother. So when she was born, she was named Kamundushaeta, meaning that this is not a human being because they have never seen anything like that. So with that story, I became curious. How did that happen? How did she become that? But only to find out that this was not at will birth. This was through rape and violence. The story goes on further when I met my great grandfather. My great grandfather lived to be 104 years old. He had all of his teeth, but he was a skinny, skinny, skinny man. And he would say to some of the people, "Oh no, when you be a good girl so that you'll get a German guy to marry you." He would tell, because that was, if you're very good, then you're going to get a German person, whether you're a man or a woman, this was the promise. So he actually was a survivor of the concentration camps. When he was let go, he was working for his master. He then earned enough money after many years of hard labor to buy 1 cow. And with that 1 cow, he rebuilt back his cattle. And to this day, 4 generations down, that part of the cow is still part of our pasture where my mother is living in near Osho. So the story of genocide is very personal. There are consequences. Some of the consequences are no land. So we're in communal areas that are overgrazed with not enough food for everyone. The idea of being enculturated or deculturated. I'm wearing this and people say, "Oh, we're wearing that beautiful dress." This beautiful dress was a functional dress. The many petticoats that the women have to wear is to protect them from rape. So it's a functional dress to protect our bodies, not necessarily because it's something that we want to wear, but this is now after the English came, that the women then can at least try to protect themselves with their dress. So I just wanted to touch on that, and then just to Marcelo and the art gallery to say thank you for inviting us. I think what would help is questions from the audience. So we could maybe have a discussion instead of me sitting here and just talking to you, because we could talk about this until the cows come home, if they say. So thank you.
So good evening. So where does one start after such a powerful story being told by my 2 sisters to my right, as well as the information provided by the first panel earlier tonight? but I am who I am because of other people have been there for me. So I would like to recognize two people and a third one in the audience tonight. These are Germans. They came from Hamburg, Germany. They were sent to Namibia by the Lutheran Church to teach at Martin Luther High School. They whetted my appetite for academic achievement. Klaus Pitch and Ulla Pitch, welcome. Please stand up so you can listen to me. And their daughter, Ovaherero, we give names with a meaning. When Ulla was in labor, she needed to go to a town called Omaruru. You generally say Omahuhu, but we say Omaruru. And there was a stream. It had been raining, so they couldn't cross. I think they had a VW or something like that, Volkswagen. They couldn't cross the river. And we're coming from a sport event in a big truck. So we had to carry them across that river into the truck and took them to Omaruru. What happened in Omaruru, we took them to the so-called white hospital. A white lady came out running, no, 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 you are at the wrong place. Please turn around and go over there. That's where you're supposed to be going. And as my teacher will tell you, I never took any nonsense from anybody. I said, go to hell. We brought somebody who needed help. I just wanted to recognize them for that. I'm reminded of a photograph of 1931, somewhere there. At the back of this photograph was written by the wife of a rabbi here in Germany. And she said, our light would outlast their flag. Why am I mentioning that? What you are seeing in us as direct descendants, we are beneficiaries of what I would call informal education by our great-grandparents to teach us, to tell us what happened to them. They put together a book that my wife and I contributed a little chapter to that. It's on sale here by Marcelo. The story of the many stories that were told at the evening campfire, the one that has resonated with me for the longest time is this story. The story of Ovaherero women who were pregnant, had given birth to babies. When they realized that the babies had absolutely no chance of survival, they made the unthinkable decision, gut-wrenching decision, to let the babies die and allow the men to nurse on them for sustenance, so the men could continue to fight against the German troops. So these men could continue to navigate the harshest, one of the harshest deserts, the Kalahari Desert. So these people could go to Botswana, the protected Botswana land then, and be able to cross the crocodile-infested Limpopo River in South Africa. That's where our diasporans are today. That's a very gut-wrenching decision. And for that, at the age of 7 or 6, being told that stayed with me. Now, the other night, I talked about the soul. We all have a soul. My soul, and many people here, our soul is the one of the story being told by our parents to us. So we will never let the light go out. We may meet and run into few obstacles, but we shall never, ever be weary. We shall never, ever stop. The other night, I also say that I do believe that in darkness, there's always a flicker of hope. In darkness, there is a light that can shine, that can bring out who we are. So I'm not going to go too much in what I wanted to say, but I think for the young people here, you might not know this, hopefully you know, is that it is noteworthy the German word for the final solution, Endlösung, was first used in 1904 in Namibia by George Hardman, when he said, the final solution for the native question can only be to break the power of the natives totally and for all time. I'm quoting Black in 2016. The victims of Oshitiro Shinjanja, that's our Showa. We don't call it genocide. We call it Oshitiro Oshianja, which literally means beyond killing. In the Nama language, Sima, you might help me, but we say Kamkui. Kamkui, I'm sorry. So that's who we're known by. When the day comes, we ask ourselves, where we find light in this never-ending shade. The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We have braved the belly of the beast. We have learned that quiet isn't justice, and yet the dawn is ours before we know it. Amanda Gorman at the inauguration of President Biden, she said those words. So let me continue. We're going to leave time for some questions. I'm reminded of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he says these words, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It bends towards justice. As James Baldwin extols us, we must tell the truth till we can no longer bear it anymore. We must tell the truth till we can no longer bear it anymore. We must not stop. We're also reminded that Eddie Glaude, a professor at Princeton University, African American, and he says the following. Sorry. He's had to. And this is to my German brothers and sisters. You are my brothers and sisters. We're all God's children. We don't hate you. We just want to be humans. We want to be treated as humans. Eddie Glaude says the following. Humans are not unique in their evils. Let me repeat that. Humans are not unique in their evils. They are unique in their refusal to acknowledge them. This is uniqueness in your refusal of the human beings to recognize what they have done. That's a uniqueness, not of their evils. So we have time as part of the human race to redeem the soul of the German people, to come to grips with what happened to us. Young people, students, you have to be the global positioning system, GPS, to lead all of us towards the promised land of coming to recognize that what happened to us was genocide. And this morning, I was at 92 Wilhelmstrasse. We spoke there this morning. Wilhelmstrasse, that building, is that where the Congo Conference, the Berlin Conference of 1884 took place, where the European powers had the audacity to decide what was good for the Africans and take their land. Fast forward 2020, the same movie is being replayed again. What do I mean by that? Rupert Polenz bullied a group of people who did not have the intellectual capacity, were very myopic. Because that's the only conclusion I could come to for anybody to agree to that so-called joint agreement. That means your soul was never touched. But what we are talking about here, if your soul was touched by the happenings of the genocide, Chitiro Shinjanja, you would not agree to that at all. I want to give the Namibian government some slack because of that. However, this 2021, we need better than that. And we have said that if we were at the table, the NTLA and OTAA, I can guarantee you, my friends, my brothers and sisters, my German brothers and sisters, I'm German on both sides of my parents, we would not have agreed to that disgraceful, insulting, so-called joint agreement. I will conclude soon here. A month ago, I wrote an open letter to the German Evangelical Lutheran Church in Germany. I pour my heart in that open letter. I said, you have educated me. You have educated my wife. In 1884, you chose not to speak up. You were on the sideline, Lutheran Church. You were on the sideline when this took place in Namibia. In 2014, you issued a statement in which you said clearly that we, the Lutheran Church in Deutschland, support the engagement between the Namibian government and the German government. Fast forward, do you still stand by that? Knowing fully well the end result of that negotiation. Silence means complicit. If you are in disagreement with that, issue a statement clearly to the world, to your parishioners, to us. I'm still a Lutheran, to say that no, this time we want to redeem the soul of the humankind, the soul of the German people, the soul of Deutsche Volk. That what happened was genocide, and we need to come to grips. We now have the capacity to speak for ourselves. Germany and Namibian government are in clear violation of international law. They're in clear violation of the Declaration of the United Nations on the rights of indigenous people to speak for themselves. Germany signed that accord, so did Namibia. And if we want to participate, we have the right to pick who can speak on our behalf. No one else can do that. Let me conclude quickly here, but what I said as a conclusion in my letter, it won't take that long. The time is now for EKD to intentionally shine its light on the darkness of human history and expose the vile crime of genocide. Let me repeat that. The time is now for EKD to intentionally shine its light on the darkness of human history and exposes the vile crime of genocide. And I went on to say, perhaps you will never grasp or understand our deep-rooted aversion to the joint declaration. But as our brothers and sisters, we hope you will hear our words. We hope you stand with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ngondi. um, a good reminder that not only the Evangelische Kirche in Deutschland kept silent, but many other entities who should have acted and who should have stand up and join you in your struggle, because the list of what should be done is very long. And thank you, Vepuka and Sima, to remind us that there was systematic and institutionalized sexualized violence, a chapter which nearly does not appear at all in any kinds of official declaration, because it's so obvious that it's against this self-acclaimed civilizing mission, that they have to be reminded, also because what all of you are saying is that are ongoing stories. It's an intergenerational trauma. It's it's an ongoing injustice. And I mean, the list is very long, from the memorials which remind the genocidaires in Namibia, to the lack of memorials which remind of the genocide. There is no money there for it. The lack of education in Namibia, but also in Germany. And last but not least, what you pointed out, Sima, and also you, Gandhi, the joint declaration is a scandal, but and that is something we in Germany should really take up right now. It's not the end of the story, because it has not passed the Namibian parliament, neither the German parliament. We have a new government. I'm not having so much hope in the new government, but we should remind them that some of them were in the opposition and criticized the attitude of the former government. So there is still space. And I also look at my colleagues Karina and Joshua, who together with your organization are currently filing lawsuits to UN bodies to put pressure on the Germans to move more. But obviously, it's also a lack of mobilization in civil society here, which allowed the German government in the past year to act like they act. So with that, I would like to pass over to Rolando, if he is there. We don't see anything.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I know we are a bit over time, so I will be very brief. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you, Marcelo, Wolfgang, the gallery. I want to especially express gratitude for listening to the testimonies of Sima, Vepuka, and Ngondi. I think these are the most important words we should hear tonight. So I won't take long after them. I will speak a little bit about, in relation to what they say about coloniality, and about the importance of unsilencing, the importance of the task of justice and restitution beyond the law, in a way beyond the material, or this kind of development neo-colonial agreements. So I think what is most important in the testimonies you carry is that memory is alive. Professor Ramose once told us, as long as we do not forget, there is hope for justice. The big danger is forgetting. And here is where the role of aesthetics, of epistemology is fundamental. That we have the knowledge and the ways of showing that memory is still alive. The genocide is part of the colonial history that started in 1492 with the colonization of the Americas, and that meant the killing of millions of people in the Americas and in Africa. And this genocidal project that is called colonialism, for us, for the colonial scholars, is inseparable from the project of modernity. So we know that there is no Western modernity, that there is no Europe as as a modern example to the world without the colonial history, that modernity was built on that colonial history. And that is why we think that we need to work against these erasures, because the erasure of genocide was accompanied with a refusal to acknowledge it, as Ngondi was showing us. And so this is what we have called in our writings the double erasure. On the one hand, committing the violence, and on the other hand, negating it. And the way of negating it is to erase it from school books, from monuments, from cities, from the imagination of people. This brings us to the question of aesthetics. I mean, because we are in that space of a gallery and in the context of Marcelo's work as well. And the question of who sees and who is being seen. I think when these photographs were first taken, they were part of the colonial regime of representation. So they were about the white gaze consuming the suffering of others. And I think it's so important that today these photographs stand as testimony of the violence, and that the white gaze cannot be negated. They reveal that violence instead of just consuming it passively. The other part that is very important, I think, when all of you refer to your grandmothers and to rape, and this, our elder that passed away a couple of years ago, Professor Maria Lugones, has spoken widely about it as the coloniality of gender. And she said in her writings that the coloniality of gender was the way, one of the biggest ways in which dehumanization will happen. Because it was not just about racializing, but it was about enabling the abuse of women's bodies through colonialism. And this extreme violence against the body of women, this unrestricted access to the body of women, was for her what was marking the colonial wound. And the coloniality, so the way of thinking and the network of people we work with, is its task is to seek for healing, because that wound needs healing. That memory is calling for justice and for healing. And we think that justice is not just, is importantly material, for example, the recovery of lands, and is importantly in the law, but it is also a healing that needs to happen in memory, on silencing, in knowledge. So we call it the struggle against oblivion. How do we own silence? And how do we create forms of restitution that own silence? Because if you restitute and you keep the dominant framework of knowledge, you are not on silencing. You are just maintaining what Sima was saying, the triumph of the modern colonial regime, of aesthetics, of epistemology, of knowledge, of the historical truth. So for us, on silencing needs, or reparation needs to undo the function of that modern colonial system that controls the truth, that controls representation, that puts everything into its measure, so that the ancestral memories can be honored and healed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rolando. And thanks to Sima, Vepuka, Ngondi, and to Marcelo and the Artco Gallery to make this evening possible. There is still some drinks left. There are many people here in the room who can contribute a lot to the conversation. So you're all invited now to join the conversation in a more bilateral way. You're also have time to look at the pictures, to buy the catalog, which is available upstairs. And so please join me in applauding Sima, Vepuka, and Ngondi, but also please join their struggle for real acknowledgement of the genocide and for real reparation. Thank you very much.